Okay, thank you. So now we have Avik from CliniOps, who's going to present his company. I'm going to go ahead and mute and give you 10 minutes on the clock, Avik. Why don't you go ahead whenever you're ready? Thank you.
I want to. Okay, can you guys hear me better now?
Yeah, that's good. Go ahead.
Hello, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we can. Why don't you go ahead and start presenting?
Can you guys hear me now?
We can hear you. You can't hear us.
Loud and clear. Go ahead.
I have unmuted myself, but looks like. Okay. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. Hi, sorry for that. I'm Avik Paul, founder and CEO of CliniOps. And lovely presentations so far, been enjoying it. And so in the context of healthcare, our focus is more on the clinical research space. And there are many aspects of it, but one of the key things that we want to highlight is outreach and diversity in clinical trials. I think it has gained a lot of momentum, especially in the context of post-COVID world and how the rapid drugs have been speeded up, but in the process, there are many questions about the different communities who have not been represented very well in other things. So those are some of the key areas that I want to touch, and all leveraging technology. And as a kind of byproduct, if I may, there's a huge amount of potential that needs to be unlocked, which has not been done so far due to the traditional way of doing clinical trials, like the papers and binders and folders and cupboards. And now moving directly into digital data collection right at the point of care, which is called the source data, and that triggers all the data science in real time, which currently kind of doesn't exist, or it's a very minimal level. Most of the data science that you hear about in the clinical research space is after the data has been collected, much later in the game, or after it has been published. So with that, kind of let me move on. So the key area for all these benefits downstream is to start with collecting good quality data at source, right, at the point of care. And how do we expand into the diverse population and increase in the outreach is by leveraging technology to go into the remote areas, whether it's tier 2, tier 3, tier 4 cities, whether it's kind of the Midwest, or whether it comes global around the world, in sub-Saharan Africa and elsewhere. So that's how we can reach through the technology. Now, what we get in return is real-time data, and with the real-time analytics, it's like actionable intelligence, all kind of helping with reducing the timelines, reducing the cost, and good quality data. Huge ROI for the sponsors and the CROs. So moving on, in terms of some of the key challenges, as I had mentioned, right now, in the intersection of patients and hospitals and the sponsors, there's only a very small intersection point of about 5% of the population that the clinical trials have been able to reach out. What that means is about 95% is untapped. Okay? How do we reach out to them? How can we bring them in the inclusive research? Different kinds of African American community, the Hispanic community, the elderly, all that. How can we kind of bring them into the mix? How can we enable the hospitals in the tier 2, tier 3 cities to participate in clinical trials, right? So that's where one of the key aspects we want to highlight. The other thing is, clinical trials have been running over decades, right? If you look back 25 years back, the success rate has been about less than, it hasn't even touched double digits, right? If you start 100 trials in human trials, about 9.3 or 9.4% gets success. So 90% of the trials fail. How can we increase that success rate, right? So again, it all boils down to good data, right? Being able to kind of pivot in real time, all that. Again, the other thing is the time and cost. Also, it's a very high-touch industry, right? And we're talking about technology. So high-touch is not going to go away, but how can we bring the high-tech to kind of augment and support the high-touch so that we can bring a mix of our combination, as Uli was saying earlier. It's a hybrid model going forward, right? So those are some of the key areas that the industry is facing. Now, in terms of how do we bring diversity, it's inclusive research, and it helps a lot in the downstream to get these different segments of the population early on. The way to do that is virtual trials, right? Is enabling digital technologies. And how do we do virtual trials? Again, through telemedicine. So, so those are all key aspects of what we have built as part of our clinical trial solution. And once we start doing telemedicine, there's a lot more we can tap into, which is wearables and connected devices. We're running several trials with some of the top pharma companies where connected devices from patient home are all part of the clinical trials, right? Now, there are certain types of trials where apart from, you can't do everything remotely, right? So there is that need for in-person. So the same platform that we've developed also helps in terms of performing home healthcare. So those are some of the areas where we focus. Now, as you can see, we are supporting trials around the world, more than 20 plus countries. Of course, all over the US, several parts in sub-Saharan Africa as well, Asia, South America, Europe, across many different therapeutic areas, across all the phases, more than 10 million data points on our system. So all this is possible because of the, the technology solution, right? So it's very difficult to do. You see Papua New Guinea here, right? Very difficult to do, clinical trials in those conditions where internet is a challenge, technology, adoption is a challenge, computer literacy is a challenge, Wi-Fi access and all those. So we have built a mobile device with complete offline capability and online sync that has enabled digital and good quality data collection at source, but at the same time, kind of made it almost near real time. Okay. So if you look at the US landscape, I mean, we've been fortunate to work with some of the top hospitals, Stanford's and Harvard's and, Boston Medical Centers, Mayo Clinics. One of the things that you don't see here is that a lot of the, Midwest and other places are not very widely represented. Even, if a study is being run at Stanford, I mean, typically the patients who get to enroll in those studies are of a different, lifestyle, different segment of the population. I mean, we can't go too far north into the Oakland area where there's a lot of, African-American population, or we can't go too far down south where there's a lot of Hispanic populations, right? So how do we bring them in the mix? We can do that through telemedicine, right? And not just, the tier 2, tier 3 areas, but also we can go around the country and around the world. So those are some of the benefits. Now, as we start going beyond the comfort zone of the hospitals and, or the confined within the hospitals, the questions that starts getting raised is the security, is the data safety, is that the PHI, right? So the compliance becomes a big deal, right? So so we have compliance built in. It's not an afterthought. So right from day one, worked on ensuring that we are fully compliant with HIPAA, with IGS2021 CFR compliance. In terms of CDISC, in terms of data standards, right? The third-party assessment of our whole QMS system. Finally got the ISO certification for 9001, 27001, and of course the GDPR qualification very recently. Coming to the product, if you look at the current landscape, there are multiple products needed to support one single clinical trial. Right? You need an EDC, you need ePro, EICF, autocoder, randomization, IRT, CTMS, goes on and on and on and on and on. Most of them are developed by individual or different vendors. Each of them have their own databases. There's a lot of interconnection and integration required. Data portability is a challenge. And there's a lot of rework for setting up of every single system just to support one single trial, right? So what we have done is we've completely shifted into verticals, 4 of them, and we have multiple patents filed on these. And the first one, there's a study protocol to run a clinical trial, one protocol, right, approved by the FDA. So we take that protocol, and there's just one single configuration where all the users, all these doctors, nurses, PIs, principal investigators, patients, access control labs, who gets to see what kind of data, PHI, clinical data, all the segment, everything is done in one place. Right? That's the configuration. Once we do that, there are 2 ways of collecting data, either 2 places, either the hospital or at home. Right? So hospital, nurses, doctors, whoever can collect the data, the patient is home, or visiting nurses, phlebotomists from patient home. Now, all of that data can be collected in complete offline mode. In the US, if you see high-end hospitals, when the doctor goes from bed to bed, room to room, patient to patient, floor to floor, the network settings are very, very stringent. They go with a clipboard, paper and a pen. And once they come back, everything has to be transcribed into the system. So that becomes a source data, which is very challenging. If they make a mistake in writing something, then it stays there forever. So offline helps in a big way. So offline, mobile, digital, and compliant, everything comes to one single database, right? And this database is connected to all these different apps, modularized apps that we have built. One for the EDC, electronic data collection piece from the source, ePro, if the patient needs to collect the data, the ICF, informed consent, they all sign on digital tablets, autocoder, ITRM, so all of that. Right? And then certain trials may need just the EDC and autocoder. Some other trials may need ePro, some may not. So depending on the protocol, we can easily enable or disable the modules that we need. So it's a very flexible way of doing things. And finally, because data is all digital and compliant, it gives you a very single, unified way of looking at things, single source of truth. So now let me expand
that's
this
our 10 minutes, Avik.
how this hybrid trials are being done.
Oh, you can't hear me, can you?
I can't hear you, Oren.
That's our 10 minutes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's 10 minutes. So I'm going to cut you off there. I don't know why you can't hear us, but
okay, now I can. Now I can.
Now you can, and there's an echo. Okay, judges, do we have any questions for Avik? No, we didn't get to everything, unfortunately.
So I think with that, I'll open up for questions. Let me know.
Yeah. Okay, well, we don't have any questions. It seems like if you want to talk for a couple of more minutes, you can take up, since you didn't get to finish, why don't you take up your time?
Sure. So yeah, we are supporting several trials in the COVID situations where patients are completely in ventilators and there's no way to do the informed consent. Even the patient party is not even allowed to enter the hospitals. And we are running several trials, and one of them is a 25 hospital across 12 different languages global study. The informed consent is signed by LAR, legal authorized representative. It could be a son or a daughter in a different country or a different city altogether. Everything is done digitally through a workflow-based triggering, where they initiate the informed consent. A video conference is triggered automatically. The doctor explains how the consenting works, pros and cons, and then the LAR signs it, triggers the workflow back to the doctor, and the doctor countersigns. Informed consent is done. Patient is taken to the ICU. And once the patient goes back home, there's a lot of these follow-up visits, which if you do at the hospital, it becomes a huge overhead on the system, on the healthcare system. Now, because of telemedicine, a lot of these follow-up visits can be done remotely. They're not really needed to come to the hospital. They're non-invasive. So that helps in a significant reduction in the cost burden for the sponsors, and also for the patients is very flexible and comfortable to do it from the comfort of their home instead of traveling and commuting and social distancing, all those things in the post-COVID world. So there's several success stories we've done. With Gates Foundation, we ran like 25,000 patient global multi-country study with several languages across the board, published by WHO, and then in the PubMed and other places. I've co-authored several publications with Harvard and Stanford. So a lot of these trials we have done over a period of time, and now in the post-COVID world with the data science, we're actually unplugging a huge amount of potential going forward. How's there?
I have one question, if I can ask. So, I know you're tackling a huge problem here, and that I support 100%. But what other things are the type of clinical trials you can do with your system?
Yeah.
There must be something that you cannot really do the same like the other clinical trials, right? What are the things, the challenges you face?
Right. So what we've seen is, if you look at the current landscape, some of the technologies have been working all along last 25 years. The first EDCs were introduced in the mid-90s, heavily focused on the hospitals only, right? So you have to be a centralized patient has to come to the hospital, and then the data is collected there. In the post-COVID, we have seen a flurry of companies heavily focused on home-based data collection, right? So it is kind of either or, right? But not every trial can be done entirely from home, right? At the same time, not every trial we want to do entirely from hospital for many reasons, including huge cost burden and stuff, right? So the ideal way to go forward is the hybrid trial. where, for example, a certain protocol has 10 visits for you can do a few visits at the hospital and the rest from the home. So those kind of flexibility is offered by our system. So that's how they, so there's, you can start with just a few, 10% from home. Gradually you can go to 80 to 90% from home. If certain trials can be done entirely, you can go 100% from home. So that's the gradual transition that we see going forward.
All right, thank you, Avik. That was great. We really appreciate it. We're going to go ahead and move on to our next presentation with Saver Health. Uli, if you could put the poll up for CliniOps, but while we get started, and everybody take a moment to give a rating for Avik